The conference room smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. I stood near the wall-length windows overlooking the city, watching Falcon Technologies' executive team arrange themselves around the glass table. My boss, Stuart, sat at the head, his posture radiating confidence he hadn't earned. The presentation deck glowed on the screen behind him, slides I'd built, strategies I'd mapped, projections I'd calculated down to the decimal point. Across from us, the delegation from Ashton Global Holdings waited. Their CEO, Clarence Whitmore, tapped his pen against his leather portfolio. $3 billion in potential contracts hung in the air between us. Stuart adjusted his tie and smiled the smile he practiced in reflective surfaces. I knew what was coming. I'd seen the warning signs for weeks. The small edits to my reports, my name moved further down email chains, my seat pushed further from the center of every meeting. But I stayed quiet, watching, documenting. Because I knew something Stuart didn't. I knew exactly how fragile his empire really was. 6 months earlier, I'd arrived at Falcon Technologies with a reputation that preceded me. 5 years at Quantum Ventures had taught me how enterprise deals actually closed, not through flashy presentations, but through understanding the intricate web of stakeholder needs, regulatory frameworks, and implementation realities that turned handshakes into signed contracts. My first week, I'd been assigned to the mid-market division. Accounts ranging from $50,000 to $500,000. Solid business, but not where the glory lived. Stuart ran the enterprise division, the $1 million and up accounts that got mentioned in board meetings and earnings calls. You'll love it here, he'd said during our introductory lunch, his hand gestures expansive. We're building something special. Real collaboration. Everyone gets credit for their contributions. I'd nodded, recognizing the script. Every corporate environment had someone like Stuart, more interested in looking successful than being successful. The first account I closed at Falcon Technologies was Bergman Industries. $400,000 in software licensing and implementation services. I'd spent weeks understanding their supply chain bottlenecks, mapping their data architecture, building a solution that addressed problems they hadn't yet articulated. When I presented to their CFO, she'd signed within 20 minutes. The negotiation itself had been a masterclass in understanding what the client actually needed versus what they thought they wanted. Bergman's leadership had initially requested a standard inventory management system, something off the shelf that could be implemented quickly. But during my discovery sessions, I'd uncovered deeper issues. Their real problem wasn't inventory tracking, it was the disconnection between their procurement forecasts and actual production cycles. They were ordering materials based on quarterly projections that didn't account for seasonal variation in customer demand. I'd built a solution that integrated their existing systems with predictive analytics, creating a dynamic ordering model that adjusted in real time based on incoming sales data. The CFO had looked at the proposal, then at me, and said something I'd remember for years: "How did you understand our business better than we do?" "I listened to what your people were actually saying, not just what the RFP requested," I'd answered. Stuart had congratulated me in the all-hands meeting. "Great work on Bergman," he'd announced. "This is exactly the kind of team execution that makes Falcon Technologies special." Team execution. Not my execution. The words lodged somewhere in my chest. I'd caught the eye of Angela from finance, who'd helped me model the pricing structure. She'd given me a slight shake of her head, a gesture of solidarity from someone who'd clearly witnessed this pattern before. After the meeting, she'd stopped by my desk. "He does this to everyone who produces results," she'd said quietly. Last year it was Terrence in the Government Contracts Division. Closed a $2 million deal with the Department of Commerce. Stuart presented it to the board as a divisional achievement. Terrence left 3 months later. Where did he go? I'd asked. Started his own consultancy. Last I heard, he's doing better than he ever did here. She'd paused, looking at me with an expression that was part warning, part encouragement. You're talented enough that you won't stay invisible forever. The question is whether you'll wait for someone to notice or make them notice. That conversation had planted something. Not anger yet, but awareness. A recognition that this environment had patterns, and I was following a well-worn path that led nowhere good. The second account came faster. Hillcrest Manufacturing. $600,000. I'd identified an opportunity in their quality control systems, proposed an integration that would save them millions in recall prevention. Their VP of Operations had called me directly to expedite the contract. In Stuart's email to leadership, I was mentioned in the third paragraph. The strategy, my strategy, was positioned as a divisional approach. His approach. I started keeping copies of everything. Original emails. Unedited decks. Meeting notes with timestamps. The third account was where the pattern crystallized. Northpoint Financial. $750,000. I'd spent months building a relationship with their chief technology officer, understanding their regulatory constraints, designing a compliance solution that balanced innovation with risk management. The day before the final presentation, Stuart had called me into his office. "I'll be taking the lead on Northpoint," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You've done solid groundwork, but this is a sophisticated client. They need to see senior-level engagement." "I've been working directly with their CTO for 3 months," I'd replied, keeping my voice neutral. "He's expecting me to present the implementation roadmap." "And you will. You'll handle the technical sections. I'll manage the strategic narrative and pricing discussion." The presentation had gone exactly as I'd anticipated. I'd walked through the technical architecture and compliance framework. Stuart had read from my executive summary, stumbling over terminology he didn't fully understand. The Northpoint team had directed their questions to me. Stuart had answered the ones about pricing, the only part he'd actually prepared. When the contract closed, the announcement email had one name in the subject line, Stuart Renwick. Mine appeared in the body text, buried among the supporting cast. I'd sat at my desk that evening, staring at my monitor. The city lights stretched out below, thousands of windows hiding thousands of similar stories. People doing work that others would claim. Competence obscured by performance. Substance buried under polish. That was when I'd started making calls to my former colleagues. Quiet inquiries. What opportunities existed outside Falcon Technologies? Who was hiring for enterprise-level positions? Where could someone with my track record make an actual impact? The response had been immediate. 3 firms wanted to talk. One stood out, Meridian Strategies, a boutique consultancy that specialized in billion-dollar scale enterprise transformations. Their managing partner, Victoria Strauss, had worked with me at Quantum Ventures. She knew what I could do. "We've been watching your career," she'd said during our first call. "The deals you're closing at Falcon are impressive, but you're capable of work several orders of magnitude larger. When you're ready to have that conversation, let's talk." I'd scheduled a meeting for the following week. But I hadn't planned to leave immediately. Because a better opportunity had just landed on Stuart's desk, and I wanted to see how he'd handle it. Ashton Global Holdings had reached out to Falcon Technologies with an exploratory inquiry. They were planning a complete digital transformation, infrastructure, analytics, customer experience platforms, supply chain optimization. The kind of comprehensive overhaul that took 18 months to implement and generated contracts in the billions. Plural. Stuart had forwarded the initial email to me with a brief message, "Take a look. Might be something here for your pipeline." I'd spent 2 weeks conducting preliminary research. Ashton Global Holdings operated in 17 countries. Their infrastructure was fractured, legacy systems that couldn't communicate, data silos that prevented strategic analysis, customer touchpoints that created friction instead of loyalty. But they had leadership commitment to change and capital allocated for transformation. This was exactly the kind of opportunity where my background in large-scale enterprise architecture mattered. The technical complexity alone would eliminate 90% of potential vendors. The stakeholder management across multiple geographies and business units required someone who understood organizational change at scale. I drafted a preliminary strategy document. 40 pages analyzing their public financial statements, investor presentations, and industry position. I'd identified 12 specific intervention points where technology could drive measurable business outcomes. I'd outlined a phased approach that would show value within the first quarter while building toward the comprehensive transformation. Then I'd sent it to Stuart with a cover note, "Initial analysis of Ashton opportunity. I think this could be significant. Happy to discuss approach." His response had arrived within an hour, "Good research. I'll take it from here. This is going to need C-suite engagement from our side." Translation: this was too important to trust to me. I'd expected that. What I hadn't expected was how quickly he'd move to erase my involvement entirely. The following week, Stuart had presented his Ashton strategy to the executive leadership team. I'd received the calendar invitation as an optional attendee. I'd watched from the back of the room as he'd walked through my analysis, using my frameworks, citing my research. He'd changed small details, rephrased sentences, adjusted the order of recommendations, but the substance was entirely my work. When the CEO had asked where the analysis came from, Stuart had smiled. I'd been developing this approach for our enterprise-scale opportunities. Ashton is the perfect proving ground. No mention of my name. No acknowledgement of my contribution. The CEO had approved moving forward. Stuart would lead the engagement. The commission structure for a deal this size would be substantial, enough to guarantee his promotion to Senior Vice President of Enterprise Sales. I'd sat in the back row, my expression unchanged. Inside, something had shifted from hurt to something colder. Clearer. That evening, I'd accepted Victoria's offer at Meridian Strategies. My start date was set for 2 months out, enough time to transition my existing accounts and watch Stuart's Ashton engagement unfold. Because I knew something he didn't. I knew that Ashton Global Holdings didn't make billion-dollar decisions based on presentations. They made them based on proof of capability, depth of technical understanding, and relationships with people who could actually execute. And I knew that Stuart had none of those things. The first cracks appeared 3 weeks into Stuart's Ashton engagement. He'd scheduled an introductory call with their leadership team, himself, our CEO, and 2 executives from Falcon's technical division. I hadn't been invited. The call had lasted 30 minutes. Afterward, Stuart's assistant had added a follow-up meeting to his calendar, technical deep dive Ashton infrastructure requirements. That meeting required people who understood enterprise architecture. Stuart had sent me an urgent message, "Need you on the Ashton technical call tomorrow. Prepare an overview of our implementation capabilities." I declined the meeting. I'm transitioning my accounts to other team members per our discussion last week. Won't have capacity for new engagements. His response was immediate, "This is a priority engagement. We'll adjust your transitions accordingly." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," I'd written back. "I've made commitments to my successor accounts that I need to honor. Perhaps someone from the enterprise technical team can support?" The enterprise technical team consisted of 2 people, both of whom specialized in configuration and deployment, not strategic architecture. Neither could speak credibly about billion-dollar transformations. Stuart had handled the technical call himself. From what I'd heard through the office network, it had been a disaster. He'd stumbled through questions about data migration strategies, couldn't articulate integration approaches, and had made promises about timeline and capability that Falcon couldn't possibly deliver. The Ashton team had requested a second meeting. This time, they wanted to see documentation, reference architectures, case studies of similar scale implementations, technical specifications for the proposed solutions. Stuart had none of those things because they didn't exist. Falcon Technologies had never executed a transformation at this scale. The analysis I'd prepared had been theoretical, informed by my experience at Quantum Ventures, but not backed by Falcon's track record. I'd watched him scramble, pulling together marketing materials and generic technical documents that didn't address Ashton's specific requirements. He'd submitted the package 3 days late, with an apologetic email about ensuring quality over speed. Ashton's response had been polite but cool, "Thank you for the materials. We'll review and follow up with next steps." Those next steps never came. Instead, I'd started receiving LinkedIn messages from Ashton executives. The first was from their CTO, Oliver Hastings. "Ms. Masons, I noticed you recently joined Meridian Strategies. We're familiar with your work at Quantum Ventures. The TechStream transformation was impressive. Would you be open to a conversation about some challenges we're working through?" I'd responded within an hour, always happy to discuss enterprise transformation opportunities. "Let me know what timing works for your team." The conversation had been remarkable. Oliver had been direct. They were evaluating transformation partners, had been disappointed with the proposals they'd received so far, and were specifically looking for someone who understood the complexity of their environment. "Most vendors want to sell us their existing products," he'd said. "We need someone who can design the right solution, even if it means integrating multiple platforms and custom development. Your TechStream case study showed exactly that kind of thinking." I'd spent 90 minutes on that first call, asking questions about their infrastructure, understanding their business objectives, mapping their organizational readiness for change. By the end, Oliver had invited me to meet with their full executive team. I should mention, I'd said carefully, that Falcon Technologies has also been exploring this opportunity. I don't want to create any conflicts. We're aware, Oliver had replied. We've decided to move in a different direction with Falcon. Their approach didn't align with our needs. This conversation is entirely independent. 2 weeks later, I presented to Ashton's executive team. Not slides that Stuart could plagiarize, an actual working session where we'd mapped their current state, identified priority interventions, and roughed out an implementation roadmap on whiteboards and shared documents. Their CEO had been present. So had their CFO, COO, and the heads of their major business units. We'd spent 4 hours together, digging into details, challenging assumptions, building alignment around what success would actually look like. At the end, Clarence Whitmore had stood and extended his hand. This is the conversation we've been trying to have for 6 months. When can we see a formal proposal? 2 weeks, I'd said. But I want to be clear, this isn't a document we're going to email and wait for feedback. We should plan for a full-day working session where we build the implementation plan together. Agreed, he'd said. Let's schedule it. I'd left that meeting and called Victoria. We need to clear my calendar for the next month. This is going to be significant. That had been 8 weeks ago. Since then, I'd led Meridian's engagement with Ashton Global Holdings. We'd conducted workshops in 3 countries, interviewed stakeholders across their organization, built detailed technical specifications, and developed a transformation roadmap that balanced ambition with pragmatism. The contract we'd proposed was structured in phases. The first phase alone was worth $800 million, infrastructure modernization and data platform consolidation. Subsequent phases would address customer experience, supply chain optimization, and advanced analytics, bringing the total program value to $3.2 billion over 36 months. Today was the final presentation. The one where Ashton's board would make their decision. And through a coincidence that might not have been entirely coincidental, Falcon Technologies had also been invited to present their revised proposal. Stuart had spent the last month trying to resurrect the Ashton relationship. He'd brought in outside consultants, hired temporary technical staff, and assembled a proposal that borrowed heavily from publicly available information about digital transformations. It was professional, well-formatted, and fundamentally generic. I'd seen a copy. Someone at Ashton had forwarded it to Victoria, asking for her perspective. We'd reviewed it together, noting the gaps in technical specificity, the vague timeline commitments, the pricing that seemed designed to undercut rather than reflect actual delivery costs. They're going to fail in the room, Victoria had said. But it's good that they're presenting first. It'll make our approach look even stronger by contrast. Now, standing in Ashton's conference room, I watched Stuart arrange his materials. He'd brought our CEO, our head of technical services, and 2 people I didn't recognize, probably the consultants he'd hired to add credibility. The Ashton executive team filed in. Clarence Whitmore took his seat at the head of the table. Oliver Hastings sat to his right, laptop open. The CFO and COO filled in along the sides. The board members took the remaining seats, their expressions professionally neutral. Thank you for the opportunity to present our revised approach, Stuart began, his voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm of someone who'd rehearsed extensively. Over the past several weeks, we've deepened our understanding of your transformation requirements, and we're excited to share how Falcon Technologies can partner with you to achieve your strategic objectives. The presentation lasted 45 minutes. Stuart walked through their proposed phases, implementation timeline, and pricing structure. The technical lead he'd brought, one of the hired consultants, spoke about architecture principles and integration strategies in broad, theoretical terms. The Ashton team asked questions. Specific, probing questions about how Falcon would handle their legacy mainframe migrations. What experience they had with global data governance frameworks. How they'd manage organizational change across 17 countries with different regulatory requirements and cultural contexts. Stuart answered with confidence, making promises about capability and capacity. The technical consultant hedged, using phrases like "we'd need to evaluate" and "depending on the specific requirements." When they finished, Clarence thanked them politely. "We appreciate the thorough proposal. We'll take this under consideration with the other options we're evaluating." Stuart smiled, apparently missing the coolness in that response. He'd probably never been in enough rooms like this to recognize the difference between genuine interest and diplomatic dismissal. The Falcon team departed. I watched them go, Stuart's confident stride carrying him toward the elevators. He'd probably celebrate tonight, convinced he'd delivered a winning presentation. 20 minutes later, I walked into the same conference room with Victoria. We weren't carrying elaborate slide decks. Instead, we had working documents, detailed technical specifications, implementation plans with named team members and specific timelines, risk matrices that acknowledged the genuine challenges of what we were proposing. "Good afternoon," Victoria said. "We're not here to present to you. We're here to work with you. Dina has built what we believe is the right approach for your transformation, but we want to pressure test it with your team before you make any final decisions." What followed wasn't a presentation. It was a working session. Oliver pulled up the technical architecture diagrams on the main screen. The CFO questioned our phased investment approach, and we adjusted the model in real time to show different scenario outcomes. The COO raised concerns about operational disruption during transitions, and we collaboratively redesigned the deployment sequence to minimize impact. 3 hours in, Clarence stopped us. "I'm going to be direct. We've been searching for the right transformation partner for almost a year. Most firms have tried to sell us their standard solutions, slightly customized with our logo on the cover page. You're the first team that's actually listened to what we need and built something specifically for us. Dina, your understanding of our business is better than some of our own executives." He paused, looking around at his leadership team. "Unless anyone has reservations they want to raise, I'm prepared to move forward. The scope will be substantial, the full $3.2 billion program, structured in phases as you proposed. I want to start implementation within 60 days. The COO nodded. The CFO made a note on her tablet. Oliver was already pulling up calendar options for the kickoff planning session. "We're ready," Victoria said simply. The announcement hit the industry press 3 days later. Ashton Global Holdings selects Meridian Strategies for $3.2 billion digital transformation appeared in every major business publication. The articles mentioned the program scope, the implementation timeline, and quoted Clarence about choosing a partner that understood strategic transformation over simple technology deployment. My name appeared in the third paragraph, identified as the lead architect and program director. Victoria was quoted extensively. Meridian Strategies' reputation as a boutique firm punching above its weight class was discussed with admiration. The morning the announcement went live, my phone had started buzzing before I'd finished my first coffee. Messages from former colleagues, industry contacts I hadn't spoken to in years, even professors from graduate school who'd seen the news. Each one expressing some version of the same sentiment: they'd always known I was capable of this level of work. One message stood out. It was from Terrence, the former Falcon employee Angela had mentioned. "Saw the Ashton deal. Congratulations on escaping Stuart's gravitational pull. It takes guts to walk away from the safe paycheck and prove what you're actually worth. Welcome to the other side." I'd responded, "Thanks. Should have done it sooner." "Everyone says that," he'd written back. "But you did it at exactly the right time. Stuart handed you the perfect opportunity to show the difference between his performance and your competence. Couldn't have scripted it better." He was right. If I'd left Falcon after Bergman or Northpoint, I'd have been just another mid-level account manager making a career move. But leaving after Stuart's Ashton failure, after stepping into the exact opportunity he'd claimed to own, sent a different message entirely. It demonstrated not just capability, but the kind of strategic thinking that transformed careers. Falcon Technologies wasn't mentioned at all in the coverage. I'd learned about Stuart's reaction from a former colleague who still worked there. He'd apparently called an emergency meeting of his team, demanding to know how the Ashton deal had slipped away. He'd blamed the technical consultants for not being persuasive enough. He'd blamed the pricing team for not being competitive enough. He'd blamed Ashton for not understanding Falcon's true value. He hadn't mentioned my name. Probably hadn't even considered that I might be involved. In his mental model, I was the person who handled the small accounts while he pursued the transformative opportunities. 2 weeks after the announcement, Falcon's CEO had requested Stuart's resignation. The official explanation was about strategic restructuring of the enterprise division. The unofficial explanation, the one that circulated through industry networks, was that he'd misrepresented capabilities, made commitments Falcon couldn't honor, and damaged relationships with a potential client that could have generated substantial revenue. His replacement was someone from outside the company. Someone with actual enterprise transformation experience. I'd received the news without particular emotion. Stuart's departure was a consequence of his choices, not my actions. I hadn't sabotaged his Ashton engagement. I'd simply stopped compensating for his incompetence. 4 months into the Ashton implementation, I was working from Meridian's downtown office when my assistant mentioned I had a visitor in the lobby. No appointment. Just someone asking if I had a few minutes. Stuart Renwick stood near the windows, his suit less expensive than I remembered, his posture less certain. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by whatever the past few months had contained. "Dina," he said when he saw me. "Thank you for seeing me. I know I don't deserve your time." I gestured toward the small conference room adjacent to the lobby. We sat across from each other, the table between us a physical manifestation of the distance that had always existed. "I've spent the last few months trying to understand what went wrong," he said, his voice lacking its former polish. "I thought I was doing everything right. Building relationships. Pursuing opportunities. Leading the team." He paused, seeming to struggle with what came next. "I saw the announcement about Ashton. About your role in the transformation program. And I realized I'd spent years taking credit for work I didn't do, representing capabilities I didn't have, and building a reputation on foundations that weren't mine." I stayed quiet, watching him navigate this uncomfortable territory. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued. "I'm not even sure what I'm asking for. Maybe just acknowledgement that I understand what I did. That I see it now." I considered my response carefully. This wasn't a moment for cruelty, but it also wasn't a moment for absolution I didn't feel. "What you did at Falcon wasn't unique," I said finally. "Every organization has people who confuse visibility with value. Who build careers on claiming others' work. The system rewards that behavior, at least in the short term." Stuart nodded, his expression pained. "The problem wasn't just that you took credit for my work," I continued. "It was that you convinced yourself you deserved it. You believed your own performance. And that made it impossible for you to actually learn the skills you were claiming to have." I leaned back slightly, my tone not harsh but absolutely clear. "When Ashton required real capability, you had nothing to offer. Not because you're incapable of learning, but because you'd spent years avoiding it. You'd built a career on borrowing competence instead of developing it." The silence stretched between us. Outside the windows, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. "What do I do now?" he asked quietly. "That's not my question to answer," I replied. "But if you're genuinely asking, find a role where you can learn instead of lead. Work for someone who won't let you hide behind presentation skills. Build actual expertise. It'll take years, and it won't be glamorous, but it's the only way to become the person you've been pretending to be." Stuart stood, extending his hand. "Thank you for your honesty. And for what it's worth, congratulations on Ashton. You earned it." I shook his hand briefly. "Yes. I did." He left, and I returned to my office. The Ashton program dashboard glowed on my screen, Phase 1 milestones tracking ahead of schedule, stakeholder satisfaction scores exceeding projections, the next wave of work already being scoped. This was what success actually looked like. Not someone else's version where I remained perpetually in the background, my contributions acknowledged with qualified praise and diminishing visibility. This was work that mattered, recognized by my name, building toward outcomes that would be measured in business transformation and organizational impact. My phone buzzed with a message from Victoria, "Board meeting next week. They want to discuss partnership track. Interested?" I smiled and typed my response, "Absolutely." The partnership conversation had been direct. Meridian's 3 founding partners had sat across from me in their downtown boardroom, the same room where we'd prepared the Ashton proposal months earlier. "We've been watching how you've handled the Ashton implementation," Victoria had begun. "The technical execution has been flawless, but what's impressed us more is how you've managed the client relationship. Clarence's team trusts you completely. When issues arise, they come to you first, not because they have to, but because they know you'll give them the truth and a viable solution." The senior partner, Leonard Kaufman, had leaned forward. "We've structured Meridian deliberately to stay small. We're selective about the partners we bring in because each one shapes the firm's culture and capability. We don't just want people who can execute deals. We want people who can build client relationships that last decades." "The question is simple," the third partner, Rochelle Quinn, had added. Do you see your future as leading transformations, or building a practice that leads transformations? Because those are different paths. I'd thought about Stuart in that moment. How he'd focused on looking like a leader rather than building actual leadership capability. How he'd chased titles and recognition instead of developing the skills that made those things meaningful. I want to build a practice, I'd said. I want to develop other people who can do this work at the highest level. Not because I need to claim their success, but because the work itself matters more than any individual contribution. Victoria had smiled. That's exactly what we hoped you'd say. Outside my window, the city stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere in those buildings, people were doing work that others would claim. Competence was being obscured by performance. Substance was being buried under polish. But not here. Not anymore. I'd spent enough years being invisible while others took the spotlight. Now I was building something different, a career where the work and the recognition were finally, undeniably mine. The difference between appearing successful and being successful wasn't subtle. It was the difference between Stuart's desperate meeting in our lobby and my upcoming partnership discussion. Between his hurried exit from Falcon and my leadership of a $3 billion transformation. He'd asked what he should do now. I'd given him an honest answer. But the deeper truth, the one I'd learned through every instance of erasure, every stolen credit, every diminished acknowledgement, was simpler. You either do the work that matters, or you claim someone else's. The first path is harder, longer, lonelier. But it's the only one that lasts. I turned back to my screen, pulling up the next phase of the Ashton implementation plan. There was real work to do. Work that would carry my name. Work that would prove, again and again, exactly what I'd always known. I wasn't skilled enough for the $1 million accounts. I was built for the $1 billion transformations. And everyone knew it now.